Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 72, and I've got another special guest for you. But before we get to that, make sure you like, subscribe, follow. Make sure you stay in touch with the podcast so you can keep watching us. My guest today is one of the authors of the recently published book titled Men Fight for Me: The Role of Authentic Masculinity in Ending Sexual Exploitation and Trafficking, and also the executive director of the Saving Innocence organization, an anti-human trafficking agency based in Los Angeles. My guest today is Alan Smyth. Alan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dylan. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. So am I, because so many different reasons. But I really just want to start with giving you the opportunity to give us more background on you. Why did you so kind of give me an understanding of your story, but really get into why you became what you are today?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
First of all, Alan Smyth, as you mentioned, I live in Los Angeles, kind of northern part of Los Angeles County, and married to my lovely wife, Sharon, for 38 years, Hala. We just had our 38th year anniversary, 2 kids,
Congrats.
a son and a daughter. And that's the bulk of my existence, is that group right there. And in my spare time, I lead an anti-human trafficking agency called Saving Innocence. You can find us at savinginnocence.org. We're based in Los Angeles. We train and consult around the country, so we're national in that respect. And but our boots on the ground, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. What led me to that, in terms of what made me, if you will, I think is what you said, something to that effect.
Right.
I was going another direction. I've been with Saving Innocence almost 7 years now. Worked in the nonprofit space for the 25 years before in an organization called Young Life, working with all kids everywhere, different kinds of kids. And after 25 years, it was time to leave, time for a change. And I had been introduced to Saving Innocence about the year previous to that. And I was really taken with just the little bit that I had heard, working with child victims of sex trafficking. And like most people who hear that, they think, oh, what is Saving Innocence? They're in Thailand, right? Or Cambodia or someplace. No, they're right here in our country, in Los Angeles. What? So I heard that a year before that. And when I left Young Life, I thought, okay, what's next? I still got some fight in me. I still got some time to do something important. And I looked at a couple different things, and I thought, I need to cold call Saving Innocence. And it was important to me to pursue that. As a dad, as I mentioned, I have 2 kids, a son and a daughter. Most of the victims of human trafficking are little girls, sex trafficking, sadly. They're little boys, but most of them are girls. And so I'm a dad with a daughter. And you don't need to be a dad or have a daughter to really care about this topic. There's plenty of people who aren't dads and don't have daughters that care a lot about it, for sure. But I can just say that a dad who has a daughter, it hits a little differently, I think. Not better or anything like that. It's not a competition. But it compelled me to cold call them and drive to the front door of Saving Innocence and meet with the founder. They weren't hiring. There's no job position posted. A little of the backstory of my time with Young Life, working with adolescents, had developed a little seminar, if you will, a little workshop that a staff colleague of mine, we delivered many, many times to a room full of high school girls, talking about their value and their worth, talking about the world's lies, to women in general, to girls specifically as our context, high school age girls, and the media messaging and the song lyrics and all the things that was beating them down. And that developed into a seminar for men, that for dads, that I led for a bunch of years, helping to empower dads and help them understand what their daughters are going through and help them answer that call and that challenge. So all of that is the backstory to why it was a no-brainer for me to cold call Saving Innocence. I'd already had a heart for dads and daughters, for men who were, for men to rise up and be different in a broken world, and how that would affect the world, but specifically the little girls that we interact with.
Yeah.
So I cold called Saving Innocence and said, I'd love to hear your story, and got the 2-hour version on a 1-hour parking meter. So I went home that day with a new education and a $60 parking ticket, which was awesome. And I was in, and I told them as much. I said, I don't know what in is, but I'm in. And we just kept talking, and they asked me to join the team about a month later, and here I am 7 years later. And what an honor and a privilege it is to serve this hurting population that desperately needs strong people fighting for them.
I mean, it's remarkable to hear all of all of that, and I'm so curious. There's so many questions in terms of like, one, I'm like, what was in both seminars, right? Like that's such an interesting conversation to have. Um, but I don't even know where to go. Like there's just so many directions with this book, with your history of what you do or what you have done. I guess maybe let's start here is with all that you've done, and with the book and the work that you've done, what do you see is most necessary right now to change and to address and to work through, for whether it be men or women? It doesn't matter. Like, how do we approach this issue of sexual exploitation, human trafficking, all of these really big, scary conversations?
Uh, Bullet point number one is we need the world to be educated and aware of what's actually happening. Most people don't understand that human trafficking is the fastest growing crime in the world. Most people don't understand that sex trafficking, specifically in this country, is a massive problem. It's not somewhere 10,000 miles away. Well, it is, but it's here. The United States is the largest producer and consumer of sexual content and pornography and all those kinds of things. And so it makes perfect sense that the entitled, quote unquote, wealthy Americans who are used to getting what they want when they want it, however they want it, would fall down this rabbit hole of addiction and pain, oftentimes masking their own pain and brokenness, and go down a sexual addiction, which ends up in them purchasing some time with another human being to do whatever they want with, and oftentimes as a child. So the sooner that we can get as many people as possible to understand that, now we can talk about a possible solution. See, until you can diagnose a problem, you don't know what the solution is, whether it's your house or your car or your body. If something's kind of not feeling right or not working right, until you actually get in and look at it and understand, define, and isolate the problem, you can't possibly come up with a solution. So number one is to understand that there's a big problem. Understand that this is a major issue in our cities, all 50 states. You could almost say every zip code.
Yeah.
Right now, whoever's listening to this, you're not far away, I promise you, from a child and an adult, but let's focus on children right now, being sexually abused and exploited within several miles of where you're sitting right now. You're tucking your kids into bed tonight, and the average age of entry is about 12 years old. So think about a 10, 11, 12-year-old. US born American citizens. These are kids in our communities and our schools are being forced to be available to have 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 sexual encounters, if you can call it that, from some broken, usually a man, every single day and every single night. And so once we can begin to understand the problem, oh, wow, that's terrible. Now, unless we do something to push against something that's really terrible, you're actually complicit in the problem itself. If you know about a problem that's really, really bad, and this is as bad as it gets, and we can unpack it as much as you want, Dylan.
Yeah.
Once you know about it, now you're compelled to act on it. And that's the essence of this book called Men Fight For Me. It's available on Amazon, but I would ask your listeners to take one more step. We created a little website, fightforme.net. Yeah. And in there is the bios of the various contributors. There's a bunch of other linked resources there. It's take another step in understanding this. Of course, you get the book there. And I was sitting in an auditorium several years ago, an awareness event on a Saturday in LA. And one of the survivors on the stage, or two of our staff were there. My co-author, Jessica, who's a lived experience expert, we call her. She spent 10 years being trafficked starting as a young child. And now she's on our staff team at Saving Innocence and is on the, helping young girls. And she was on the stage telling her story. Another woman right next to her named Rachel telling her story. Rachel, in the middle of describing her trauma, it goes into great detail in the book of what she does, what happened to her. She said this. She said, after 5 months of this, I gave up. And she said, I could no longer fight for myself. And then she said, and you ever been in those situations where it's a crowded room, but you feel like the person's talking right to you? And she looks in this crowded room. And again, I felt like she was talking to me, even though at that point I didn't know her. Since then, she's become a friend. And she said, I could no longer fight for myself. I needed someone to fight for me. Okay, that lit me up. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, because now I have a trafficking victim turned survivor that had waved the white flag. I can't get out. There's no way I can get out here. Actually, she would talk about the fact that she made an attempt on her life. That was the only way out. And she's saying, I needed someone to fight for me. Well, you stack that on top of the fact that my backstage pass into this crime through Saving Innocence tells me most of the buyers are men, most of the sellers are men. The biggest part of this problem is men. So there we go back to diagnosing the problem. You got a little spot on my forehead last year. The doctor said, I don't like to look at that. Let's come in here. He took a little chunk out, tested it. He said, yeah, guess what? That's a little piece of skin cancer. Come back in. We're going to dig it out. Okay, great. He knew what it was. He knew where it was. He knew how to treat it. He took care of it. So in this problem of this exploitive culture leading up to all the way to human trafficking, there's lots of exploitation that happens prior to actual trafficking. We talk about that. The problem is indisputably men, the biggest part of the problem. Great, we're 50% there. We know what the problem is now. We know what the solution is. So I approached Jessica and a number of other amazing survivors. Rachel's one of them. She tells her story in the book, and there's several others and some professionals. I said, listen, I feel compelled to write this book and have this message to men because we're the biggest part of the problem. There's already a bunch of great women. Great, keep doing what you're doing. The missing ingredient is a bunch of strong, healthy men seeing the problem, willing to fight on behalf of this problem. And that's the essence of the book. It's a book for everybody. A lot of women are reading it and loving it, but there is a good 20% of the book that's me and my male voice challenging men, exposing some of the lies that we bought into, and encouraging men to step in to be part of the solution. And for the longest time, it's just called Fight for Me, based on what Rachel told me. And our book consultant said, add the word men, since that's really the target audience. We want to show up in men's searches and things like that. Okay, so men. Rachel didn't say I need men to fight for me. She said I need someone. But we added men because, once again, men are the problem. We need a bunch of good, strong men to step up and say, no more, not on my watch. And so that's some of that answer. That's the problem. There's a massive exploitation, exploitive culture that we're living in, and we're looking the other way. We're simply allowing it to happen, to the tragic demise, oftentimes, of children. And that just isn't okay.
I want to highlight something and maybe dig into it a little bit, because I want to hear more about I very much understand this, and this is kind of a topic that I recognize that I want to write my own book about, in terms of in the social media realm and how it's developing culture right now. But I want to hear what you have to say on the exploitative culture, and kind of define for us what does that really mean to you, and how are you kind of using it?
Well, if you look up the word exploitation or exploit, in the dictionary, there'll be a couple different nuances of it, but it's basically using some person or some situation for your benefit. You're using it in a selfish manner for your benefit. And so we have a culture and a society that is exploiting sex. It's exploiting men too, but women and children, for somebody else's gain, somebody else's profit. Oftentimes there's a monetary profit involved with exploitation. And so that's what's happening out there. There's an economically driven crime called human trafficking, called sex trafficking. There's labor trafficking as well, but sex trafficking is really what we focus on. And there's some other person asserting ownership, actual ownership. It's called the modern day slavery. Asserting ownership over another person who happens to be vulnerable for various reasons and available for various reasons. And he maintains control over her and then puts her for sale. And he takes all the money for it. He's exploiting her sexuality, her availability to a broken man. And again, there's men and women on both sides of all sides of this, but for mostly men. Now here's the situation. Most people listening to this right now, or entering the conversation some other way, they might be tricked into saying, this would be a bad mistake, I'm not doing that. I'm not going down to a street corner in LA or whatever city you're in. I'm not going online. I'm not buying a person for sex. So this conversation isn't for me, right? And to which I say, no, not so fast. We're going to expand the boundaries of what exploitation is. And we're going to enlarge that definition. So as I said, it's anything that is using somebody else in some way, or shape or form for your benefit, your gain, for your needs. So I know a lot of women listen to this podcast. I know a lot of women consume pornography. Traditionally, men have been a major part of that audience and that consumer base for pornography. It's a major on-ramp to trafficking. In fact, oftentimes is trafficking. There are human trafficking victims being trafficked in, meaning they have no choice whatsoever, into some kind of a movie set, being raped over and over again, being filmed. And now that's on a popular porn site. And the problem is, among many, is that the consumer has no idea who's there consensually and who's there against their will. In fact, being trafficked in. Now, I'm no lawyer, but non-consensual sex is, I'm pretty much sure it's called rape.
Right.
So there's this billion-dollar industry monetizing the raping of vulnerable people and oftentimes children, minors. So that's exploitation. I mean, we could go down the list of all the ways that society is exploitive, but those are some of the major ways that we have to take a look at as a society and as a culture.
I'm curious, like, I guess I'm always curious as like, I don't necessarily see porn as the beginning. And so where, I don't know if you've done any studies or looked into that kind of research. What is the on-ramp onto things like porn and things like sex addiction and, the many things that kind of lead to ultimately sex trafficking and the use of sex trafficking? So, I mean, have you kind of looked into that research? I'm relatively ignorant of that. It's not something that I've looked into.
Well, what we see in our work is that the biggest common denominator of either a buyer or a seller or a victim, there's three key parts to trafficking. There's the sex buyer, there's the trafficker or the seller, then there's the actual victim. And what we see, the kind of the Venn diagram, all the circles, and the one that encompasses most of all of those is an early childhood abuse of some kind in all of them, an early adolescence, neglect, abuse, oftentimes sexual abuse. And it's a kind of a generational curse. They keep repeating what was done to them oftentimes. So a lot of times, these kids that we serve, what an honor and a privilege it is to serve these kids, be part of their journey out, oftentimes have been thought of and acted upon as a sexual object from the age of 2 or 3 years old. And that was their reality. 4, 5, 6. Our youngest little client was Saving Innocence a few years ago. We received her. She was 7. Again, this is not Thailand.
Right.
This is California. This is an American citizen. 7 years old. Her own biological father was selling her from the age 4, 5, 6, and 7. People lining up to essentially, abuse and rape this little kid. So that's her reality. That's all she knows. And so now we're walking with her on this long path to healing and freedom. Buyers, oftentimes it's what's the on-ramp? There's usually some sort of brokenness, some sort of isolation, some sort of loneliness, which causes them to look for some sort of sex because some sort of relationship hasn't worked for them in the traditional sense. Or maybe it has. Maybe a lot of the buyers are married. But maybe they've looked at porn. Maybe they've just thought of things in conversations with their friends, and they've thought, my wife would never go for this little fetish or this little fantasy, or maybe I've tried and she doesn't want to, or whatever. And so he keeps going in secret, in the shadows, down this rabbit hole of an exploitive behavior. Begins to get addicted to some way, shape, or form. Sex addict, and you know how it is with addictions. You always need a little bit more to achieve the same high, and keeps going down that rabbit hole. And porn is, a big part of it early on, but before that, there was some sort of brokenness, self-medication. There was some kind of situation typically. Now, young kid, they say the first exposure to porn could be 8 or 9 years old. There isn't necessarily a lot of brokenness in an 8 or 9-year-old. I mean, certainly there are some that have journeyed through that, but there's some curiosity. There's the friends are doing it. Someone showed it to you, and they go down a certain path. It in some ways it's pretty complicated, and there's psychologists that could really give a great answer. Right. In some ways it's pretty plain and simple to see. It's all available like never before. Technology today puts porn and everything else right in everybody's hand through their supercomputer called an iPhone, and everything is just available more so than it ever has been.
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation. I'm curious what you think. Do you think porn should be a more kind of frontal conversation rather than one left to the devices of parents? Like, do you think it should be something that is discussed in schools at a younger age, or do you think it should be a parental conversation? What do you think?
All of the above. I think parents have abdicated their role as parents in many cases. A lot of times parents, they let the iPad or the phone or the video game be their babysitter while they're doing other things. They're not supervising well oftentimes. Um, I think parents could learn and wake up a lot to all of that. I also don't think that in the big picture, you should be able to buy and sell and control and manipulate a vulnerable person at any age, especially a minor. And lots of pornography is exactly that.
Yeah.
Um, there's a new documentary actually coming out, just announced. I've been waiting for it. A good friend of mine created, he's got a 3-part miniseries called Beyond Fantasy. And by the time this airs, it will already be out. So look for Beyond Fantasy. It's a hard hitting look at kind of interviewed everybody for 5 years in the pornography, all the actors, producers, directors. And he said some really chilling things, and I'm sure it'll come out in the documentary. I haven't seen it yet. And he said not some, but most of the people on there, they're against their will. We mentioned that earlier. So there's been a really interesting effort over this last year to really shut down the truly illegal side of pornography. Theoretically, there is a consensual ethical side of porn. I've heard the phrase ethical porn recently. I'm not sure what that is, other than it must be highly vetted, make sure it's of legal consenting age and all those things. Okay, I'm not in the business of trying to control what a consenting adult does or doesn't do. I'm not trying to police that.
Right.
But where it crosses the line, and this is where the big picture government authorities, moralities need to come into play and truly create a way where we're not going to allow you to monetize rape videos.
Yeah.
And just recently, Bank of America and MasterCard, Visa and MasterCard, pulled out of the largest porn site in the world, I think, and said, we're no longer going to be your financial back end because there's so many rape videos and so many trafficking videos. It's infested with videos like that. We're not going to be part of that,
Right.
essentially shutting them down. So we
Good.
need the big picture to grow a spine and start having those kinds of conversations, shut down all that abusive, manipulative stuff.
Right. It's such a it's such a deep and it's such a wide conversation because you see things like nowadays, like things like OnlyFans and the many porn sites that have popped up. But OnlyFans is an interesting one specifically because essentially it's supposed to give power to whoever's creating it. But essentially, what I've seen is, sure, you can have a single female that creates that, but then on the flip side, you never know who's actually controlling that. And it's
Exactly.
a really interesting kind of conversation of, is this an act, or is this is her choice to make this happen? And there's ethical porn. It's an interesting conversation to have in any regard. Is ethical porn even something that um
Right.
is destructive in some way? And so, like, how do you, I don't know, it's really interesting. I think in the next 10 years, the wide array of conversations that we're having at such a high rate and high scale with social media is really opening up this necessity for accountability that's never really been thought possible,
Right.
right? I think a really good example, and I'm really curious about your thoughts on this, is the Jeffrey Epstein kind of saga,
Yeah.
because obviously it's so relatable to this conversation. Um, that I mean, people are still not happy because there's a list, right? And has that list really been made public? And what does that mean for those people? What does it mean for uh, sex trafficking in general? I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that whole saga?
It's been traditionally a difficult crime to track down and to prosecute for a lot of reasons. Um, one reason is that it it sneaks into the richest, most powerful places in the world, in our country,
Yeah.
in government, in celebrity. And if they truly blow the whistle, like, wouldn't it be interesting? Like, the girlfriend just got convicted because she facilitated trafficking between the victims and the clients. So she knows who the clients are. They must have been read in the courtroom or something. Like, where's that list like you're talking about? Well, the list is some powerful, rich, famous, powerful people. Some people are on that list. And so there's an active suppression effort. Magically, Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide right before. Oh, really? Are you sure about that? You sure he committed suicide? I'm not a big conspiracy guy, but let's just look at what's plain on the wall. You know, you got the royal family involved there. You got former presidents there. You got all kinds of people like that. And on more of a local level, I mean, it's the cop, Rachel, in the book that I referred to. In chapter 3, she tells her story, and she says she was sold to uniformed police officers.
Right.
So in her mind, that took away the police. The traffickers do that on purpose to isolate her. You can't go to the police because they're part of it.
Right.
Who's going to help you? So we just need a massive reboot of society. We're in a free fall, protecting lawbreakers, going soft on the perpetrators. It's happening in a lot of governments, a lot of cities, and there are district attorneys and other authorities that aren't prosecuting people that should be prosecuted to the max related to all these crimes. It's ridiculous. And in the middle is vulnerable people needing someone to fight for them, and that's our job, to fight for them.
Yeah. So then what's the goal? What's the plan? Like, what, when you say, and you don't obviously have to give away the whole book, but I'm curious with men specifically, what do men need to do to fight for trafficking victims and to make a difference in this exploitative culture?
Yeah. Men, and that's my cry from the mountaintop. That's my lane. I'll speak to anybody at any time, but my lane, because I am a man, is to speak to men, and I'm an expert on men. I've been a man my whole life.
Right.
What do men need to do? Men, I can say this with all humility, and I can say this appropriately because the proceeds from this book are going to trafficking survivors. I already have a job. Get this book and buy a book. Buy a book for all the men in your life, because we do go into great detail defining the crime, understanding the crime, survivors bringing it to life, and then there's a whole bunch of challenges and resources for men. The short answer is it starts at home. Think of concentric circles. We need every man, one man at a time, to look in the mirror. One of the chapters is titled "Look in the Mirror," and make sure your life is in sync with a non-exploitive society that you want your daughter to grow up in. Be the kind of husband that honors, serves, and protects and respects your wife. Be the kind of dad that honors, serves, respects, and protects your children. Let them see you do that. How do you talk to the waitress at dinner? What kind of music do you allow in your home? What kind of things are you watching on TV? Do you have certain stations on TV that maybe you don't turn on when the kids are there, but they're still there? Maybe they stumble across them. Make sure your life in the shadows. Go into the shadows when no one's looking and get your life in order that lines up with a non-exploitive culture. Get your own house in order, and then go out from there. Get a couple of buddies. Have a men's group. Once a week in the morning, go have a breakfast together, work through a chapter of this book or whatever reason, talk about it. Then take some responsibility for your community, for your schools. In chapter 4 of the book, the subtitle, the tagline says Authentic Masculinity. And people will say naturally, well, what is authentic masculinity? What does that mean? And I go into some detail and I break it down. And in my humble opinion, I give a definition. What does it mean to be a man? No one really knows. There's no agreed upon definition. Is it a certain age? Oh, 18 or 21? Oh, when they get married? Oh, when they have sex? What is it that makes a man a man? And so I kind of talk about the little experience I had with my son and some buddies and their sons when they're starting at 5 years old. And job number 1 was to define a man for our kids, give them the gift of clarity. What are we shooting for? And so we came up with a 4-pillar explanation of a man, of authentic masculinity. And number one, I'll just say them briefly, and that we unpack them in the book.
Mhm.
Number one, he accepts responsibility. A real man accepts responsibility. He doesn't run from it. It's not just the things that are squarely his, but maybe he takes responsibility for the bigger picture, you know, his community, his neighborhood, the world. Accept some responsibility. Number two, he leads courageously. Okay, an authentic man, a real man leads courageously. If we're really going to step into solving big problems, it's going to take courageous leadership. We're going to have courage. And there's a note, the commandant of the Marine Corps wrote a book called War Fighting years ago, and he defined courage. He said, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the power to overcome that and keep going anyway. And so it's possible, men out there, that you could be a little timid, a little nervous, a little afraid of something. That doesn't mean you're not being courageous. Step into that, lean into that. It's going to take courageous leadership for you to step in the way of your friends as they're going to the strip club, as they're doing this, as they're doing that. You're going to have some honest conversations with the guys that you run with. We're going to need men to do that. That's part of authentic masculinity. Number three is he lives a life of service. A real man gives, he doesn't take. One of the guys at the end of the book, I have a bunch of guys, 9 guys. They give a couple paragraphs on what they consider authentic masculinity. And this stud, who's this former CIA operative, and now goes around rescuing, kids around the world that have been lost. And he said this. He said, "As soon as a man takes, he loses all credibility." Right? A real man, an authentic man, is here to give, to serve. He's not here to take. You're here to serve your community. And then the last one is an authentic man, a real man, knows that who he is more important than what he does. So the idea is the internal. A real man focuses on the internal, his character, his integrity, his honesty, his follow through, all those kinds of things that are hard to see and measure, and not as consumed with the outside, the external. We got too many men out there chasing the next business deal, sacrificing their family, chasing their own pleasures, their own addictions. They're focusing on the outward, not the inward. They're building the kingdom of self. And I'm not saying there's something wrong with the next business deal and to make a good living. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But when you do it and you compromise who you are as a man, and your kids and your wife are laying in the wake of that, then there's a problem. So that's authentic masculinity. If we can get enough men to live that way, I don't know what the number is. I don't know where the tipping point is, but there's no room for human trafficking with a bunch of men living that way. They won't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no room. And so we'll solve human trafficking, but we'll solve a lot of other problems too. That's what men can do. And start at home. Have a big vision, but take small steps. Buy the book, read the book. There's steps in there. Again, not a shameless plug. You help support trafficking survivors, and it'll walk you through some really challenging and encouraging steps to help fix a broken world.
I think that's going to be the challenge, to even start at home. I've been a part of, I've been building my social media for just over 2 years. I've spent a lot of time on social media. And growing up with social media, that's the interesting thing about my generation. We grew up with social media. We were kind of created within the realm of social media. I've seen a lot of different messages, right? Only recently have I been able to see a message that was crafted for good men.
Mm.
And in the beginning, the message that I saw, and I think you could probably agree with this, was a bad one. And that was, how do you get women? How do you sleep with women? How do you attain women? Almost as if women are property. And this assumption comes from, in my own research and my work, so much of it comes from a connection to religion. And not to say that Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any of the religions are bad, but they can be used for bad. And so much of American Christianity is really based in women were property. Women were treated as if they were supposed to abide by the man. And there's so many, unfortunately, cult-like sects of Christianity in America today that are pushing this idea that women should be subservient to men. And culturally, social media is transforming that. I think there's a very large deconstructing movement right now, and that's why I think there's so much polarization on social media right now, where there's this conversation of men versus women. And the reality, I think, what's happening is women are recognizing that they have a voice, they have a following, they can create a community, and they're like, fellow women are recognizing that, good men are recognizing that, and saying, "Go forth, talk about the stories that you've felt, that you've gone through, that you've seen." Um, have those conversations and change culture, where there's men who were built within this structure of whether it was religious conservatism um, or they actually this is actually really beneficial for them, are fighting against that and saying that that's not appropriate, that's not okay. Um, but it's such a complicated conversation that nobody knows what's right, because now it can be muddied up with things like the idea of gender, the idea of what is okay in sex, because sex is such a taboo conversation itself, of what is okay and what is not. But not only that, but then you add in this idea of now there's multiple genders, and people agree with that, don't agree with that. How do we approach that conversation? Well, it's pushing aside, I think, the fundamentally more important issue to talk about, and that is how men approach the perspective, or approach perspective with women, right? How do men see women? Because you can't see them as property, right?
Mhm.
A man is not property. That goes against all sorts of things that society has upheld. But when we look at women and say women are property, half the men out there would say, yeah, that's right. And that's fucked up, right? That's a big problem, and that can't persist, especially with the, I think, the cultural direction that women are traveling in. And that's a damn good thing. I think your book is great, but I think women as well. You could write a whole book for women about women fight for each other as well, support each other, because when you develop 50% of of the population to say, "Fuck no, we're not going to approach that. That's not happening."
Mhm.
I mean, you have an interconnected network of naysayers and advocates that say that is not going to happen to my child. It's not going to happen to my sister. It's not going to happen to my cousin. It's not going to happen to my girls. No, it's not going to happen. And I think that's a really important thing. It's a really powerful thing, because I mostly work with women. So that's, I want to empower the conversation, because strong women do not emasculate men. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, strong women empower good, strong men to be more strong and more powerful. But we need to redefine the conceptualization of power and the conceptualization of strength, because how we've looked at it before is preposterous and ridiculous in my mind.
Yeah, there's a lot in there to jump off of, and I'd start out by saying that there are broken, dysfunctional people that have perverted everything you can imagine, and
Yeah.
so religion, specifically Christianity, and others that you mentioned, there's the good, healthy version of that when acted out the way it was intended can bring hope and healing to everybody. But then there's people, you're right, that have taken it all and twisted it to be an ugly version of all that and everything in culture. It's almost, I don't know, politically incorrect in some ways, um, to even talk about being a strong man, because the answer in some parts of our society seem to be you have to be weaker, because the problem is that there's a lot of strong men that have used it for hurt and harm and bad intentions.
Right.
And so we're all getting swept up into this paradigm or this stereotype that to be a man, to be masculine, is somehow wrong and offensive to other people. The problem is that if men shrink back and get weaker, it just creates a bigger gap for the strong men with bad intentions to fill, and the problem
Right.
gets worse. We need good strong men to stand up against them
Yeah.
and hold them in check and say,
Yeah.
not now, not here, not ever. And so everything has gotten a little bit upside down and twisted from A to Z in our culture and society. And that's my message to men. Again, I'm surrounded by strong women. Boy, am I strong, am I surrounded by strong women. That my staff team at Saving Innocence, 30 of the 35 are women.
Yeah.
Several of those are survivors, and they earned that phrase for a reason. They have survived something you can't imagine. And
Right.
the other ones are strong women in here fighting every day. So I know what strong women look like, but you can't find a lot of strong men
Yeah.
that are living out their path and their track for good.
Yeah.
And that's my message and my challenge to men. Look at this, understand what's happening, and now in your lane, go be part of the solution. We're either part of the problem or part of the solution. That's it. It's one of the two. There's no neutral. Because if someone is neutral on a problem, they're part of the problem. You got to stand up against it in some way, shape, or form. You do it in your way. You be you. You know, it might be something small, certainly in the beginning, but you can't look at something terrible and then have no action whatsoever. By your apathy, you're part of the problem. So that I'm trying to get men to get off the sidelines, get off the couch, and join all the strong, awesome women that are already fighting this fight. And be you, be strong, and stand up against the other men that are doing stupid things.
Yeah. Well, what I think is hard about this, and I'll go back to my point because I don't think I actually went into this part of it, but that message on social media that we saw when social media first came to be was this idea that women are property of men, and like I said, I've built a social media following of almost 600,000 people on TikTok, but 80% of those are women, right? And I look at myself as a strong man, not because I'm any stronger than anybody else, but because I have developed my values and I've honed them to be consistent, right? I keep getting people that like, I've watched your podcast for however many episodes, and like, you don't change your messaging, you don't change how you approach things, right? I'm open-minded, but I develop an idea of this is how I want to be, not for other people's, you know, other people's minds. I could give two shits how other people look at me. I care about how I look at me. Because I lived in that mindset of almost wanting, I shouldn't say almost wanting to kill myself. I almost killed myself for a long time, and I wasn't a strong man. I was strong in other ways, but I wasn't strong in the one way that mattered, and that was maintaining my self-respect and my self-love. Uh, but there's a lot of men that don't know how to do that, have never been taught, and the only thing that they'll see is never what we're talking about right here. And it lends me to question, right? Because what we are talking about right now is not popular among men.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard pill to swallow, right? It's not popular. It's not something that you're going to see like you see. One of the people I very much disagree with and very much dislike is a man named Andrew Tate. He says some very misogynistic things, says some very hateful things against women, and it's bothersome. But he's popular among men. Right? He's very popular among men. And how do we approach that, right? Like how do young men who are trying to follow in footsteps of men like you and me, where they're trying to better society, especially for women, and you can ask the same question for women, how do we approach that kind of conceptualization of what masculinity looks like and how men are being portrayed on social media, and that's what they're seeing? How do we approach that issue? What do you think?
We need parents to be vigilant, and this next generation. There's sort of the short game and the long game. Like, well, let's demonetize pornography today, and it's being done right now. Okay, so let's do big picture stuff right now, but then we play the long game, and parents need to be actively involved with their kids and their social media. The FBI has a stat. It's a little bit older now, and I think it's a much bigger now, especially after the pandemic. They said pre-pandemic, there's 900,000 predators online. 900,000 predators online in social media, video games, those kinds of things. And when the pandemic shut everything down, more kids and more people were online more than ever. It was like Christmas morning for the predators. Like there's a target-rich environment, they just like trolling and finding people masquerading as one person at a different age and luring, grooming people down a certain path. And the available ones are the younger ones, and parents need to wake up and get involved in that. You might consider not letting your child be on social media at some point. You probably will, but not without you actively looking at it and helping them understand the dangers that are out there. I spoke at a conference recently, and I showed a little 1-minute video clip to the crowd. And we've all seen different versions of this. A National Geographic thing. It's some African desert, and it's talking about the predator, and it shows this lion. What does that lion do? There's a plan, right? There's a strategy. He's slinking down in the tall grass. He's downwind. The herd goes by, herd of zebras or whatever. He doesn't jump on the strong, confident, and aware one in the front, most likely. Most often, he waits for that young little one that gets separated from the pack, who's a little slower, unaware, jumps on that one, devours that one. And so parents need to raise their kids to be strong, confident, and aware. When the pack of adolescent kids are running by these predators, they're looking for the one that gets separated from the pack, the one that's alone, the one that is unaware, that's not confident and not smart, meaning they're not making smart decisions, and that predator jumps on that one. So social media, boy, being a kid today, being 12, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old with all of the social media traps and landmines, it's a disaster waiting to happen for kids.
Yeah. Scary. It's having a 10-year-old son. It's not a comfortable, it's certainly not a comfortable conversation to think about. And even, I just had a daughter, 10 weeks ago, and that's certainly an even more uncomfortable conversation because here we are now, right, with this ever expanding technological environment and universe, almost is probably a better way to explain it, because it's so infinite and so vast, that what will it be in 10 years when she has, undoubtedly is becoming more interconnected. It's just a very, very scary thing. And it always goes back to this idea that there's bad people in this world. And if you don't understand that, if you don't respect that, you will be doomed to fall prey to them. That's like being an antelope and thinking there's no cheetahs around.
Yeah.
You're probably going to die.
And I don't want to be a downer, and I want to maintain the ability to see the beauty of this world. And there's a lot of wonderful people, and there's a lot of beautiful things, and all that. But underneath that, there's a dark, ugly, violent existence.
Yeah.
Really violent.
Very.
Really dark and ugly throughout the world. And it's not as far away as you might think. And I want all your moms and dads listening right now to hear that. Think about it. Hit rewind on this video that you're watching or the podcast and listen to that again. Hear me say, I promise you, it's not as far away as you think. Yeah. I don't want you and your kids to live in absolute peril and fear, but we have to be smart about it. We have to be aware of what some of the dangers could be, and are. It's because it's not as far away as you think, and it's as ugly as it gets. We just saw news just yesterday. Some 16-year-old girl went to a kind of a graduation party, never came home. She's gone. It's like, okay, nothing good's happening. If she's alive, I have a pretty good idea what's happening to her right now. It's like,
and it lends itself to, I think, a bigger conversation that we think society is our safety net. But the reality is nature always transcends society. The nature of man, I like to think about it this way, because nature is it's certainly not a cesspool, but it is you think about like circle of life kind of things, right? There's predator and prey in life, in nature. And we are, by all intents and purposes, a part of nature. We are an animal, and we are our own predators and prey. And that's the really, really remarkably difficult thing, I think, for people to understand is that in nature, it's typically species against species. Humanity is different. We've built society to be that safety net, but it's also its own environment of predator and prey. And so we in interspecies, uh, we have predators and prey within our species attacking each other. And so we need to be remarkably aware that the danger is still here. The danger is next door potentially. And that's not to say your neighbor's a closet sex offender, but he could be, right? He could be the trafficking king of the region. I don't know, but it's something to be aware of, to be understanding of, to be respectful of, because they're very much, if you don't respect the violence that's capable or that people are capable of, you'll fall prey to it, you know. Even and that's the one thing is like you pay attention to, because I've been to war, right? An interesting story that I have is I was a part of an agribusiness development team and a provincial reconstruction team. And by our nature, our job was to give back to the community, right? And so I was a security member, so I didn't really talk to people. I just prepared to shoot people if they shot at me, right? That was my job.
Okay.
But what was interesting is that we had a route clearance package. That's basically guys that would drive on the road and literally find bombs, right? By either driving over them or mine detecting them in certain ways and paying attention to that, right? So their job was literally to go out and find the enemy, right? Where our job was literally to go out and give back to the community. Well, the interesting thing is with our job, we gave to the community, which ultimately gave to the Taliban, which ultimately gave to the people that would attack us. So they stopped attacking us. They would only attack the route clearance packages in certain areas, right? And but they would almost never attack us unless we went to specific areas that were so dangerous that it didn't matter who was in charge, right? So a really interesting thing is that if you're giving back to these people, they stop paying attention to you, right? But if you're the enemy, you're the enemy, right? And so it's what I find so interesting about that story is that if you're just hyper aware, right? Because that was one of the things that we did is we made sure, because there was a difference between the ADT and then the PRT. The PRT got shot all the time. The ADT didn't, right? Though we gave back, we were also incredibly well trained and very, very consistent with our threat posture. We were always on our guns. We were always paying attention. When you would go to the PRT and go on a mission with them, they almost always got shot, mostly because all their gunners were in their hatches, like not paying attention, not looking around, not actively scanning with their turrets. And so what you found is people look for the easiest, just like you said, the easiest targets, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're the easiest targets, it doesn't take much, right? But if you're a hard target, and that doesn't take much either, right? If you're just looking around, if you're paying attention, if you focus on yourself to just be a little bit more aware of your surroundings, if you teach your kids to be a little bit more aware of their surroundings, prepare them for what they are supposed to do in the event that someone this is I'm sure one of the tactics is, someone comes up to the kid and says, "Hey, your mom told me to pick you up from school. What's my mom's name? What's her phone number?" Right? Asking questions that only your mom would know, or a very close friend of your mom would know. Like pushing these conversations on your kids to be more aware, to be more secure, to be more focused, and be a harder target that they won't be approached. They won't be the target. And unfortunately, that means someone else will be the target, but save who you can, in this conversation. It's such a, that's where like my past with war, it's like I've prepared myself for these conversations. I'm ready. Like the whole fight for me part, like, yeah, I'm already doing it. Like I'll go to war. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
The bad people are bad people. I don't have remorse for bad people doing bad things and me stopping them. I have no remorse for that. I don't care what you do or why you do it. If you change, certainly I'll work with you. But if you don't, that's a problem. It's a big problem for me. I think more people need to learn how to speak out against that and take empathy and throw it out the window for certain people.
Well, and that's where we need, again, my particular lane and target audience for this communication is men. We need men to step up, and there's an element of protection, not in a way that in any way diminishes strong women at all.
Right.
But from my chair and my seat, I see women and children being targeted by a broken society. Most of them are men.
Yeah.
And so we need good men to step in that line of fire, be the Secret Service agent,
Yeah.
and step in that line of fire. And hopefully it'll never come to that, the kinds of things you saw in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And it's like I said earlier, it starts in the home. Okay, we can change the world later. Start right now. Look in the mirror. Correct your own actions to make them healthy and non-exploitive, and then surround your family, and then go outward from there. One community at a time, one school at a time, one city, one state.
Yep.
And eventually, if we get enough men doing it, somebody might say I'm crazy. That'll never happen. I can't ascribe to that. I can't do that because the stakes are too high. We have to be successful in stamping out this massively gross exploitation and trafficking. It has no place in a civilized society. And I for one, am gonna keep fighting against it till the day I die.
Oh.
And I'm asking anyone who wants to join me, let's go.
Yeah. Well, it's not a preposterous idea anymore, right? Maybe 60 years ago it would have been, because how are you gonna, do you want a newspaper? Do you want a TV station? How are you gonna get it out there, right? But now this object, I'm holding my phone in my hands for those who are listening to the podcast. This object is literally the most powerful communication tool we've ever had in the existence of humanity.
Yep.
I can post a TikTok video and have 2 million people see it in a couple weeks. That's remarkable, right? And so like the ability to then use that at scale with a number, like imagine a small community, 100 people, right? If one person can reach 2 million, 100 people times 2 million, it's 200 million people. That's 2/3. It's nearly 2/3 of the whole population of the United States seeing that message. And that's incredible, right? So your message is not preposterous. Your potential for starting this requires people, and I always look at it this way. It's not about me spreading a message. It's about me and then 100 people that follow me building their own message, right? Yeah. It's you writing your book and then me writing my book, sharing that together, expanding that together, having this podcast be spread to the people that need to hear it, and just continually talking about having these conversations, because we're in a very, obviously there's dangers out there, but this is probably the best thing that we can do to counter it. So we can use the very system that has in many ways exploited people to do better things, to do good things. And that's a good thing.
Well, technology and, the smartphone and computers and podcasts and all the things, so many of them have been used for destruction. All right, let's use that same technology and fight fire with fire, like you just described.
Right.
Get enough people. And I always say, people ask me, what can I do? And there's practical things I can tell them, but I never want to answer too quickly. I say, I don't know. What can you do? Like, who do you know? What do you know? Where'd you go to school? Do you have any money? Do you have a podcast? Who are you? Do what you're already doing.
Yeah.
Only use it for a tool of safety and something positive in this space. You don't have to go out and get a new college degree. You don't have to change careers. Do what you're already doing, but tweak it a little bit and use it in the good side of this fight. And if we can get a lot of people doing that, we got a shot at this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, just a few ideas coming to mind, right? You could start a podcast interviewing survivors. Yep. You could start a podcast interviewing, organizations like yours, right? Mm-hmm. You could write a book, do the research. That's a hard one, right? But you could do the research, write the book about something, as deep and intrinsic as sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. You could literally make videos on here's how to protect yourself online. Here's how to protect yourself from sexual sexual exploitation, right? Not hard. These are not hard things to do, right? You could become a subject matter expert on whatever it is that you want to be a subject matter expert on. You just got to start somewhere. You got to do the research. You got to put yourself uh, in in league with people like yourself, Alan, right? And start figuring out what do people need. Sometimes it's not even about what you have. What do people need? And then have, you know, if 100 people ask that question, you might get 100 different answers about how to solve that problem of that person's need. And that's a good thing, because when you approach a problem from 100 different directions, there's bound to be one solution.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, we need more people digging into the same subject and finding different solutions, finding different approaches. I think it's good that, you know, you have a different background than I do, and that we can both look at this problem from a different direction in many ways and approach it differently, because we do approach it differently, and that's a good thing.
Well, and you're exhibit A of someone doing something good. You're taking your podcast and your significant following, you're exposing them to some new ideas, probably for a lot of them. You mentioned earlier, you're going to put some of this on your TikTok channel. Awesome. Way to go. By the way, if you're listening, Saving Innocence also has a TikTok channel. We just started it. So you can, anyone you're following, follow Saving Innocence, you know, and put a few things up there once in a while. We're also on all the other social media at Saving Innocence and Instagram, Facebook. And so I invite any of you guys to follow us and retweet and reshare and follow and all the things, and help us as we report stories from the front lines and stats and tools and helps and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And just immerse yourself. Like you said, I think you said get in league, immerse yourself at least as much as follow a few anti-trafficking agencies. Start with Saving Innocence and find some others and just see what's happening. Be part of the conversation. Put a comment on something. I mentioned this sometimes. Somebody said, well, what can I practically do? I said, here's what you got to do. Wherever city you're in, wherever you live, Google, you know, anti-trafficking agency near me or something. Find a trafficking agency in your town. If you can't find one, use Saving Innocence, but find one in your town. Look on their website, call them up, something, find out how many staff they have. It's probably small. They probably have 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe 15 staff, maybe more. Next time you go to your grocery store, buy that many gift cards for Starbucks or something. Put them in an envelope, send them to the address. To the heroes that work at ABC Anti-Trafficking Work, thank you so much for what you're doing. Just know we are cheering you on. Have a coffee on us. What a big deal that would be. It seems so small. Literally everyone watching right now, listening, could do that. And let's have the on the street, first responding, street level staff that are out there with these kids and adults. Let's let them know that we see them. We're with you. I can't do it, but I'm so glad you're doing it. Go get a cup of coffee on me. That would be huge. Everybody can do that. That's step one. Go do that.
That's a great idea. I feel like I need to do that.
Yeah, you should.
That's definitely, definitely something that I think, I mean, it's such a simple way to kind of inspire people to keep going and keep doing what they're doing. It's the little things. You don't you don't need to be, you know, plastered in the newspapers as a hero and all this stuff to keep going and to keep doing what you're doing. One message, right? Like one person walking up to you and just saying, thank you for what you do and I appreciate you, is it's a powerful thing. And I feel like it's almost lost on me, because I've been thanked for my service so many times over the last 15 years that in many ways the military part of me, I completely disregard it in some ways, and maybe that's my own fault, but I still get people, and I got a message recently about what I do in terms of suicide and suicide awareness and prevention. That it just really hit me emotionally to read that message on YouTube when I read it. And it was just like, wow, like that still has this poignant, like it just hits you in a spot that reminds you of, this is why I'm doing it, because there's people out there that used to be, or that I used to be like, right? Like and that's not a bad thing. it's this recognition that there are people out there that are looking for help, that are looking for people that have any sort of inspiring story to show them, like, to pave the way. You don't need all the answers. It's just like looking at Dylan, for this person was the way for them to recognize a part of themselves that can move forward. And that's a really good thing. And just even these little messages can make powerful impacts.
Yeah. The people that are out doing the hard work aren't doing it for someone. They're not doing it for the thank yous or the Starbucks gift cards.
Yeah.
That's not why they're doing it. There's a much deeper motivation, whether you're in the military or you're in anti-trafficking work. But it sure is nice once in a while for
Yeah.
someone to extend a genuine, heartfelt thank you, and a little gift card, a little something once in a while can do wonders. So, in terms of the practical stuff, number one, get a little more educated. Go to savinginnocence.org. There's 5 or 6 videos posted. Watch all the videos. Read the different things. That's a good place to start. There's a lot of things out there on the World Wide Web. Get this doggone book. Read it. There's a ton of information and survivors telling their stories and
Yeah.
all kinds of things. And then find a trafficking agency, adopt them, and wherever you live in your community. And the fall is approaching. Great opportunities to recognize and just say something. Christmas is coming up. Before too long, a few months. What if you found an agency and you sent some Christmas gifts to the people they serve or those that serve them? Like,
Right.
add that to your Christmas shopping list. Get
Yeah.
5 extra things. Get 10 extra things, and it'll mean the world to
Yeah.
those that are out there in the middle of it.
I will, for
Good.
sure. I'll be making a way. And maybe it might be, I don't know. Maybe that'll be worthy of a deeper video, maybe another podcast episode, or even a YouTube video of just like interviewing some of those people to talk more about the subject and get that out. I love it. Yeah, such a good idea. Well, Alan, I want to first off thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for just being here. But before you go, you got to answer one question that everybody answers, so you get the opportunity. If there was one message that you could leave the world, Alan, what would that be?
That's a great question. What's the one thing? You're on your deathbed. What's the last thing you want to say? Hopefully, I'm not on my deathbed. If we're going to keep in keeping with this subject matter, obviously, I would want the world to wake up, to open their eyes, and say no more. Not on my watch, to use a military term. To wake up and understand that this problem is not as far away as you think it is, and that there are millions, literally millions, of vulnerable people being tragically abused up to and including the point of death. We've had a number of our kids be murdered in the last year because of this environment that they're in. It's incredibly brutal. Wake up, understand it, get involved, and say no more. And I'm happy to be part of that solution. You can find me at savinginnocence.org. I'll be happy to help you in that journey, give you some more ideas. Go to fightforme.net, and you can contact me off that website as well. I'd be glad to be part of that conversation with you.
I love it. Alan, again, thank you for everything you do, and everything you've shared with me today. It's been wonderful, and I imagine we'll remain in touch. At least I hope. Yeah. And for everyone listening, thank you for listening. I hope you visit Alan's organization. I hope you read his book. I'm certainly going to order a copy soon. Yeah. And thanks for watching or listening to the Dylan Experience. And that's it.